All right. Hello. It's been a while since filming any new episodes, but we are back with episode 18 for the StackCast. And today we're speaking with IDK. This is what we're going to stick with for this episode. That's going to be easiest name, I believe. And he is going to explain what exactly he does and who he is. Go ahead and take it away.
All right. I'm IDK. I am currently the lead maintainer and code developer and sundry task doer of the Invisible Internet project, aka I2P. Specifically, I work on the Java version and the Go version, which is not quite complete yet, but we're working on it.
All right. And let's, I guess, start from the very beginning. Just in simple terms, what is I2P?
Well, I2P is an anonymous overlay network which does a variant of onion routing, which is what Tor does, where you pick hops in the network and then send information to each hop that is only retrievable by each hop so that you can obscure the origin of a piece of information. But we do things a little bit differently. We make a different set of trade-offs than Tor does in order to make our network, if you were to visualize it, it would be flatter, where everyone in I2P is participating more or less equally in organizing the nodes on the network. And so we have less central control over who becomes a node in I2P, which is desirable for us because it gives us scalability properties that aren't available in other onion routing networks. But it's also slightly undesirable because it means that we can't audit the relay supply. And one practical effect that this has is that where Tor has something like 5,000 relays and something like 3 million users, we have something like 50,000 relays and something like 50,000 users.
So you went ahead and already answered one of my next questions, which was going to be what specifically sets I2P apart from something like Tor? Because immediately upon hearing about this project, that was my first thought. Like, okay, this sounds similar enough to Tor, but there have to be differences. And I kind of had to do a little digging into that to find out more for myself.
I actually have a slightly different answer to that question I could give.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think that if we were to consider these trade-offs, it's less. It's not very good to think about us in competition with Tor. I think Tor is solving today's problems and the near future's problems, and I2P has a vision for when the world, when everybody in the world wakes up to a need for privacy that doesn't just exist for people who are at serious risk, but even people who are at small risk. I think we need eventually, 8 billion I2P users, more or less.
And
Right.
just kind of fun question to throw out there really quick. At what point do you think this would be? When people you were talking about like a further on down the road kind of realization. When do you think that could possibly be? And I'm almost afraid to ask what could potentially spark that, but what are your thoughts?
I don't know. For me, I thought it was when I really thought it would have become real for people when gamers were swatting each other and people were invading Zoom meetings and stuff. Like, it seemed to get really down and close to people's lives and life-threatening when that kind of thing happened. But that didn't set it off either. I'm not quite sure. It's frustrating to me though, because one of these things it's sort of a basic human need on two levels. Like, We need to be able to interact with each other, and we lose privacy when we interact with each other, more or less. Like it's not a direct curve, but you don't lose it by not interacting with people. And and but people want to interact with each other. So how do we do it? And I don't see why, or I don't see, I don't have any idea what's going to um, actually set people, uh, light a fire under them to get involved in being more private and involved you know, maybe the IRS will start coming after people and that'll scare them. Gosh, I hate talking about scaring people.
Of course. And there have been plenty of times that I've kind of seen the world changing just in the last few years and thought, okay, maybe this is the red flag that's going to be big enough to kind of spark people to be more concerned about these things. And it still hasn't happened yet on a large scale, so we'll see how that goes down. But I didn't want to get off the point for too long here. It's just a little curious. But going back to your role with I2P, I wanted to ask specifically, how did you become involved and get to where you're at today with maintaining that?
Well, I suppose there's a lot of different versions of that story, but if I were to pin it down to this particular trajectory, sometime around 2014 or 2015, I think it was 2015. Well, preface to this, in 2011 I quit all my social media accounts. I had like a whole breakdown. I couldn't handle having all these social media accounts just chirping at me all the time, so I quit every single one of them and stayed off the internet more or less completely for about 3.5 years. And then in 2014 I got a GitHub account, and in 2015 I got a Reddit account and started trying to find ways to interact with the internet that didn't feel as unhealthy as the social media stuff. And I found a few things that really seemed appealing to me, and I'm not sure quite in what order, but I think I was using I2P to remotely access a server at my house to compile a core boot ROM, and from the job that I had at the time, and that was my interest. That was the thing that got me interested in I2P. So I go to the subreddit r/I2P, and I started answering questions, and I just answered every question that came across that subreddit for 3 or 4 years. And then the Java I2P project started to notice that, hey, there's this random person just answering all everybody's questions on this Reddit. And by that time, I had like learned how to use some of their externally facing APIs and was like writing my own I2P applications and things like that. And so they came and they asked me, we're looking to solve some onboarding problems. We'd like to be able to pre-configure people's browsers. And so they set me up with a new computer, and said that I could, and said, figure out how to automate browser setups on Windows. And that was my first project with them, and that actually is still a project that I maintain. It's changed a couple of times, but it is now morphed into the I2P Easy Install Bundle for Windows. So yeah, that was my first project for them after being a volunteer for about 4 years, and I still maintain it.
And what year did I2P come about in the first place? Excuse me if you already mentioned that. I just wanted to.
That was a long time ago. It's kind of got a storied history, actually. I2P started in little after 9/11 in 2001.
Okay, definitely has been around a little bit longer than I would have expected. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, the big three, so to speak, of the anonymity networks that emerged at that time all came out within about 2 months of each other: I2P, Tor, and Freenet.
Interesting. Timing wise, I guess it sort of makes sense, but it's just crazy to think that it's been that long.
Yeah.
Um, we covered some of the differences between I2P and Tor. Um, what about I2P and other mixnet technology?
We're pretty unique in our approach. And really there are only a couple of onion routers that are designed to pass messages in the low latency way that we are. The only other ones that I can really think of um, are Tor and this other thing called LokiNet. It's actually made by a former I2P developer. Um, he's got some ideas. I'm not sure they're all great, but they're pretty good, and it's a neat project, and they're making money at it, I guess. So good for him. Um, but the big difference for us is that we let people um, host traditional internet services inside the network. So you can host a DNS server if you want to. You can host a website if you want to. And we already have support for proxying datagrams across the network. So you can actually build UDP applications where you just fling a datagram out at the network and address it to somebody, and you don't actually get confirmation that it came back, which is not a thing that's available in Tor and is sort of available in this LokiNet thing, but it's a little different.
And you said this LokiNet. I'm actually not familiar with that at all. I haven't come across that name before. It was developed by somebody that used to develop for I2P.
Yeah, he went by Psy at the time. Now he goes by Magistrate. Uh, smart guy. Codes real fast. Uh, I think some of the people he worked with on the C++ I2P project have um, strong opinions about him, but I've never actually met him, so I don't really totally feel comfortable commenting on that. But
I won't
he
ask
wrote a
any
lot.
deep questions about that.
Yeah, but
I
he
figured
wrote a
there was
lot of
probably a
code.
story there, though.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of code. I don't think that there's any animosity there or anything. I think he had an idea of what he wanted to do and ran with it before we could, accommodate the idea. I think it might be that someday in his original documentation, he pondered the idea that eventually I2P and LokiNet might connect, but I'm not sure that he has any interest in that anymore. But it's cool that there's another person actually trying. And of course, like there are also multiple implementations of the original I2P network protocol now. We've got the Java one, which is the one that started in 2001. And then about a decade later, 12 years later, there was the C++ project, I2PD, was started. And they work with us on protocol development. We make sure that all of the routers can talk to each other with them. And then about 5 years after that, about 10 years after that, they greenlit me to work on Go I2P. So we're working on a whole other library with a whole other school of thought for how to build an I2P router there as well.
Somewhat unrelated, kind of tangential question again that just popped into my head. So I know things like speed is kind of one of the kind of little annoying issues, I guess, that people deal with things like Tor. Um, would you say that's kind of comparable with the experience using I2P versus Tor, and not to, what you said, pit things together or against each other too much, but just out of curiosity?
Yeah, you end up having pretty similar performance at the peaks and at the lows. And um, you also end up having a little bit higher variability with I2P, though. So, like, you might have an average of whatever X number of bandwidth per second and standard deviation of a little bit with Tor. And with I2P, the standard deviation tends to be a lot. And that's because of this flatter network structure where everybody can be a node. You might be going through somebody's residential connection or phone, and you're going to be pegged to the slowest router in the chain. That said, though, we do peer selection to avoid that, and you pick from a section of the network that your router is determined to be healthy, so to speak. So and that has this goal and effect of reducing that standard deviation and making the speed a little bit more predictable.
Okay. Of course, it was just something that came to mind because I know that that can be kind of just one of those everyday frustrating little kind of barriers to use for people. And I'm
Yeah,
sure, everyone would like an easy way around that, but I'm not sure that one necessarily exists. What have been some challenges kind of in the development process since you've been with I2P that you've noticed, and how have those been overcome so far?
I think in some ways there's a kind of victims of our own success in a way. The person who maintained the project before me is, I consider him a good friend, and he's also extraordinarily competent. Uh, Makes it look easy. Really, really smart guy. Um, and he actually inherited the project in the middle of a disaster. The original lead developer, who went by the handle JRandom, disappeared in 2000. Nobody's seen or heard from him since. And the community around that guy actually ended up taking up the development of the router, and there was they had to change version control systems and seek out new hosting. Somebody bought the domain name out from under them and held it hostage for like a decade. It was a whole big disaster, and ZZZ takes over in the middle of this, and he's at the time a C programmer. Well, he works in C. That wasn't his career. I won't say his career, but his experience was in C. And he took over this large Java project and was pleased to find that Java was easier for him, but um, also the code was highly complicated, and it was clear that JRandom was kind of figuring things out as he went. And ZZZ took it upon himself to enforce some traditional engineering processes on it and build a really solid implementation of a piece of software that he added interfaces to that you could communicate with from outside. So a lot of people who learn to develop I2P applications get started by learning these interfaces, and the router looks really opaque to them. And that was true for me for years. Uh, you get you get really easy, very familiar socket-like interfaces that work for your application if your application is just a consumer of I2P. But if you want to understand the network and how the router actually constructs itself, there's a fairly large specification, a very complete, very carefully documented specification to implement. And there are subtleties to the implementation of that specification that arise sometimes kind of unexpectedly. And so I think our biggest problem with getting new developers is the approachability of the core router code. Applications we made really easy to work on. Core router code is well constructed, but it's hard to understand.
I mean, most of this would go over my head completely. It's all impressive to me that this kind of thing is even possible. Not being directly on the development side of things usually. Um,
Well, I'm limited in a different way here. I have been, so immersed in the development side here that I sometimes find it difficult to um, understand exactly and hear and understand exactly what people really need. Uh, so it is a thing.
that is interesting. Definitely a completely flipped problem. I'm used to interfacing directly with app users and things like that, and then hearing their concerns and suggestions and what they would like all the time. And I'm not generally the one that's going to be doing anything but passing that information along. And um, I never considered being on the complete opposite side of that. That is an interesting point of view, though. Um, Going forward from here, kind of what would be the timeline for the project for, let's say, the near future, and then a little bit farther down, kind of what's the big goal?
Well, I mean, for this year, we have a few things that we need to definitely get done. We need to update the datagram protocol that we use. It's pretty old and actually lingers from way back in the JRandom days still. And we need to do post quantum noise in our transports. Those are the two big goals for this year and maybe the early part of next year. For the far future, as as a maintainer and I guess privacy activist. I wonder about that term. The
And maybe advocate at the least, it sounds.
advocate, yes, advocate. That sounds right. Um, I think the end goal is always going to be get it into the hands of more people and who want to use it, whatever that means. Whether that means giving them some, publishing a chat app that includes a router or something and trying to popularize it, or it means shipping out the background daemon that runs all the router processes on a sophisticated Linux server now. Um, whether one thing or the other or anything in between, it's really just about getting more people involved in using it, because that's actually by design. Everybody who's using I2P is contributing to everybody else's anonymity on I2P, even
Of
if it's
course.
just in some small way. Yeah.
One question that always comes to mind for me that I like to ask anyone kind of working in this online privacy promoting space is, do you have any strategies to kind of help get around the stigma against privacy preserving tech and just the kind of knee-jerk reaction that people have to that being for certain types of people and not others, I guess you could say?
I don't have a great answer because I think a lot of that stuff is not born from a place of reason. Um, I think if there was, if we could count on, if we could count on people being rational about it, it'd be a lot easier. A few things might work though. Quips about whether or not they have doors on the bathroom in their house sometimes seem to sink in. Um, the and But maybe a developer perspective answer is uh, do something fun with it. Uh, One thing I like to talk about is we have a person who interacts with our network and develops applications for it, who their main product is a way of facilitating peer-to-peer connections between Minecraft users. And Minecraft is not a thing that, on average, people think requires a whole lot of privacy. But I think they're wrong about that. Gamers swat each other all the time. But even if it doesn't, this has this other effect, though, where if you can establish a game connection through I2P, then you don't need like a third-party matchmaking service. You don't have to entrust your kid's information to Microsoft to be able to play with the kid down the street. You just play with the kid down the street, and you use I2P for hole punching. So maybe just do something fun with it. Set up, video game servers, something harmless, and show how easy it is, and show how convenient it is, and how it gives you a sense of autonomy and ownership over the thing that you're doing.
I think
That
that's a great example, actually, is kind of a very approachable use case for people that are concerned about their minor children, perhaps, and just adults, gamers who just don't want to be part of the drama that you hear about so often with the swatting and so on that you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. It might be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's happened before. I think privacy actually might make the the gaming community less toxic, and it actually works in reverse too. I know I'm 37, almost 38 right now. And when I learned how to use the internet in grade school and middle school, the norm was to always give a fake name, always use a handle, never give away your personal information. And that
I
didn't
remember
shift.
learning similar things when I was younger too. Just I assume no one's up to any good, right? And I'm not so sure that that's as big of
It
a
was a
talking
right
point
decision.
anymore.
It was a good decision, but that changed. It all changed around Facebook. You start to have like the nascent social networks, the MySpaces and the Zangas and all those ones, but then Facebook comes along and turns this assumption around and markets it very well. It says, no, publish your whole life, be an open book. Other people aren't that dangerous, and they're kind of right about that. Other people aren't that dangerous, but the rest of it, though, kind of sucked. And they made it very normal and very marketable, and made a lot of money off of encouraging people to forget this axiom of being in control of their identity and relinquishing it to Facebook. And what happened? An existing place that was, maybe not great culturally, but was never as bad as the kind of stuff that people will say openly under their own screen names on Facebook now. Like, I mean, like, these people show their ID and they say some of the most awful shit. So I just, I just maybe people need to maybe thinking about it from a privacy first perspective made them consider the consequences of what they were saying more, and now it's like, nah, other people aren't that scary, and I will act with total impunity. Uh, it's frustrating.
Absolutely. There's a lot of covering our own eyes going on for sure. And we buy into the exact things that we wouldn't be comfortable with if we really sat down and thought about it. And I guess at the end of the day, that's the part that I think almost anyone should be able to connect with. It's just not as much of a talking point that I guess you hear about as much as you used to. Like you were saying, it's so much more important now than ever, and yet you see that kind of fading into the background because the kind of cool factor of new technology is kind of just overridden any concern about it, I think. And that's not the safest path to go down because there's still all this really compelling, really interesting new tech that people are working on out there that is also keeping your personal interests in mind at the same time. And unfortunately, that's not what's getting most of the attention.
No, it's not. Um, you know, we I get one inconvenience, and of course, network effects are real. Like people join the networks their friends are, and people stay on the networks that their friends are. So their network effects are very difficult to defeat. Um, but I don't know. A lot of this stuff seems like a dangerous addiction sometimes.
So it definitely does. Um, Personal perspective, this concerns me a lot of the time, just seeing kind of the social change that has allowed for so much of this continuing to become this bigger and bigger beast over time. But to kind of steer a little bit back to I2P specifically, um, just going to kind of switch gears for a moment to, let's say, I guess, kind of the beginning. I'm sure you would know this having worked with this project for as long as you have, but what was the thought process, and I can assume, but behind things like the naming, logo, things like that? Can you kind of explain what you know about kind of this startup process besides just the timing of it all and the general inspiration?
Well, it's a complicated answer on a certain level because not a lot of the folks who are actually none of the folks who are involved right now are the folks who were involved in 2001, although we have contact with a few of them. Um, so um, in 2001, the September 11th terrorist attacks, or whatever, happened, and and as a result, pretty much instantaneously, a number of new bills get introduced which involve expanding various like investigatory powers and surveillance powers, et cetera, et cetera. And in the various communities online, a few people start thinking about ways to safeguard against these. And they've got a lot of things to think about. They've got to think about technical needs for one thing. And they also have to think about how to do it in a way that doesn't run afoul of the existing laws or the new ones that are likely to pass. And out of this set of requirements, a few projects emerge. You have Tor, which emerges out of the Onion Router research at the U.S. Navy lab. You have Freenet, which I believe Ian is English. I think he's a university professor. I don't quite know for sure. I've never actually met him. And you have I2P, which gets started by this guy named J Random, and it's sort of between they sort of represent the less formal, more hackery contingent of these three groups. Um, and they have a little bit different ideas about how to do things. Like Freenet wants to be a big distributed data store where nobody can determine who entered a piece of information into the data store, and nobody can determine who's retrieving a piece of information from the data store. And they do that kind of successfully. And they're still working on it today under a different name, Hyphenet. And then Tor gets takes off at first because they have a pretty clear idea and they have pretty clear goals. They want to be an onion router for reaching the internet at large, in particular the web, uh, in a way that is anonymous. And so that's like the original purpose of Tor, and it is still kind of the purpose of Tor. They've just done that in a much more elaborate way now. And then I2P, on the other hand, they don't want to exit at all. Their goal is to replace the internet with I2P, more or less. And so they don't actually care very much at the time about what Freenet or Tor are doing, because in the end, Tor might become a specialized protocol for picking your nodes in an I2P network, or Freenet might use I2P as a transport layer. So we're kind of taking this idea that that we should replace the internet very seriously from the very beginning. To
And
put it all.
so okay. Just to make sure I don't lose this thought too, because I know I mentioned it at the beginning of kind of the last question. But so I don't forget specifically the branding around I2P, I guess.
Oh yeah.
I want to make sure and touch on that too. So this concept of invisibility, that makes sense. That's understandable on its own. There's a very interesting kind of brand logo with this too. Is there
Are
significance
you,
to this basically?
are you talking about Tupi, the little guy with the mask?
Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do not know too much about the history of Tupi. I know that there was that it was a mascot drawn by a community member. I know that he's supposed to be holding a mask, and I know that the colors are supposed to correlate with a stoplight. I
Okay.
think.
The dot colors, I was going to ask about that next, if there was any particular significance to that, because it looks very on purpose, not like something that would be chosen just as a fun stylistic thing.
Yeah. We used kind of a graph of stoplights going from red to green to indicate the router startup process, and that's where that comes from.
Okay, thank you. That definitely answers that. Because that was something that stood out when I was looking into this too. Um, as far as the your current team goes, how many people are working on I2P at the moment?
It's between. I guess I get to count another one now. So I would say six people working something like full time, like upwards of 25 to 30 hours a week. Um, Maybe another 2 dozen or so in the community doing testing or submitting patches or writing bug reports.
So not some big gigantic team, obviously, and a good amount of support just from people invested in the project, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's actually really important too. We like we have a much in a way, we have kind of a simpler thing going on than exists in like the products that the other networks are shipping. Tor in particular, like Tor browser is an incredibly elaborate piece of equipment. Whereas in I2P, we're just doing the network protocol and letting people attach applications to it. So maybe it's reasonable to have just the router team covered in this case. And, that's actually makes our team a little bit more comparable to a bigger one. But yeah, it's pretty small group, pretty heavily dependent on the community being willing to submit bug reports and feature requests and tell us what we're doing wrong.
And speaking of these community contributors, if you wanted yourself to become a contributor of some sort, how would you go about that?
Probably a good way to start right now is to join the IRC chat on IRC2P. So you'll have to install an I2P router and connect to the IRC network that we run inside the network to do that. It all comes mostly pre-configured. You just have to point your client at the router and it'll take care of it. And then the other thing to do, and maybe this is not a great idea right now because I'm working on the Git server for the next month or so, is to create an account at either i2pgit.org or git.idk.i2p. We also have a GitHub account. It's just I2P. Anything that you submit there gets mirrored to our GitHub or our GitLab rather. So anything that people want to do through GitHub is acceptable as well.
Okay. And are there any particular needs, I guess, from the outside where, how would I put this? Extra help with something in particular could be appreciated right now. Like if there are any viewers that are inspired to want to find out what they can particularly do, what would you say could be needed the most, I guess, from people willing to volunteer their time and their efforts?
Well, something that's probably a weekend task for somebody else, but is a month's task for me because I don't really know Python, and I know even less about Python too. We need somebody to help us update the website. We have a website that is currently powered by an old Python 2 framework that we we don't have anybody who wants to update it, and so now we containerize it and reboot the container when it goes iffy. But it would be really, really, really great if somebody could find a way to migrate our website to something better, like Hugo or even a modern version of Flask. Unfortunately, our custom old version of Flask is just incomprehensible. Probably best just to take the content and present it with something else. But unfortunately, it's all written in restructured text, and only Python knows how to read restructured text. So until I finish writing the Go library for it, that's a lot. So yeah, somebody to update the website. That would be cool.
All right. Well, you heard it there first. Somebody to help with the website at the very least, right?
Yeah.
And then kind of going back to you personally, I guess, what have you found the most rewarding so far in working on this project?
I think it's opened up the possibilities of the world to me in a lot of ways. I, you know, I got on a plane to DEF CON to meet ZZZ for the first time about 11 years ago, I think. Yeah. No, less than that, 9 years ago. And That was the first plane I had been on since I was 16. And uh, it was, it felt like the world getting bigger. And that's what I'm grateful for.
So I'm assuming you've made a lot of pretty good connections in your time so far.
Oh, yeah. Diego's one.
Of course, of course. He always seems to know someone from everywhere, I've learned for sure. Um, Lots of networking going on in this space, certainly. And speaking of which, actually, are there any other projects that either you have worked on kind of in this privacy space or um, any, I guess, that you just that serve a different purpose, perhaps than I2P, but kind of share a similar philosophy that you would like to kind of shout out here or mention that you play particularly nicely with, I guess.
Um, well, I'm pretty interested in making us work well with the various libp2p implementations that are underneath the stuff like IPFS and Birdie and a few other things. Yeah, like the yeah, I think libp2p shares a lot of, if not necessarily privacy minded ideas with us. The idea of accessibility and low barriers to entry and making things that communicate with each other. I think libp2p and IPFS have some pretty good ideas.
That does sound like a good kind of philosophical match there. Before I start kind of asking more questions about kind of getting involved and kind of trying this out as a new kind of potential user, I just want to make sure and ask here, is there anything super important here that you want to make sure and get out about the project itself and kind of just what has set this apart in your mind and for users that you want to make sure and mention here, just so that I'm not glazing over anything incredibly important here, because I know there have been a lot of questions kind of all over the place. So I don't want to miss anything.
Um, well, we're very much a community-oriented project, and one thing that about community-oriented projects is that, like, um, participation is your social currency, so to speak. Where the more you get involved, the more people listen to you, and that might not be that might not be ideal in a lot of ways. Sometimes people have great ideas on day one, but uh, persistence, keep at it. We're not. It's not because we hate your ideas. It's because we have to be critical to be safe.
Um, and you've mentioned this kind of strong sense of community here. Where would you where would you go to get plugged in, first of all, not just to learn more about I2P, like the website, but to actually communicate with others about it and their experiences and kind of join in these discussions a little bit more? You mentioned the IRC.
Yeah, we
Um,
have.
I don't suppose there are any large social channels where people probably are getting plugged into this much, but I always ask just in case. There are quite a few projects we've spoken with that do have like a Twitter, etc. So
Well, we do have Twitter and we do have a few other socials. Probably the most active one is Reddit, but they're all sort of imploding. So who knows how effective they are anyway. But In general, if you come to Reddit, you'll get your questions answered, as long as you use sentences. Uh, and that tends to be a pretty good support forum. The other support forum is I2Pforum.net. And obviously, neither of those are federated or any good at that, but I2P Forum is run by members of the project. So, if you don't like Reddit, then you can use I2P Forum.
And anything like Telegram, Matrix, anything of that sort?
I have a personal matrix, but I don't think we have a regular matrix, or a project matrix, and there are a number of matrix rooms. Most of the matrix rooms that have I2P in the name I'm in. I can't make great guarantees that I'll be able to answer or anything like that, though. As far as Telegram goes, I don't do Telegram. Just
Completely fair. It's a mess, to say the least. So you mentioned you have a personal matrix. I don't know if that's something that you share with anybody, but do you have any channels where you personally kind of share your thoughts on anything for anyone that would be interested in what you're doing?
I have a blog, but most of the time I don't have time to use it. Um, if they want to see what I'm doing, it's usually on. Well, right now it's github.com/go I2P. So that's where most of what I'm doing at any given moment ends up showing up. Unfortunately, it's all in diff form. I very rarely tweet or blog or
That's
really
fine.
anything like
And
that.
do you mind if I ask what the blog is in case anyone's interested in seeing, even if there aren't any recent posts, just any
Yeah,
good reads on there?
it's EYEDEKAY.github.io.
All right, awesome. Um,
And I guess it's
well,
also mirrored in I2P as IDK.I2P. But
okay. Okay, great. Um, well, I hope we covered everything that was kind of the most important to get out there about this project and about what you're doing with it. And I think you did a good job of kind of explaining how this stands out from, uh, you know, things like Tor. That was one of the main things on my mind, because I know that's probably what most people would be thinking too. Is well, don't we have things that do this? And you've just done a good job of explaining these things. I appreciate your time. If there's anything else that you want to make sure and have in like the description whenever we do publish this, let me know. I'll throw it down there for people to check out. But otherwise, I I think we're almost over an hour now. So I think we covered quite a bit of ground today.
all right. Well, I was really happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And I think that's really all that I'd like to cover besides that is to thank you for having me and thank Diego for inviting me and the Monero community for being such good friends to us in general.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and call it for episode 18 then. Thank you so much. Um, and gosh, 19, we're almost at 20. So a couple more and we'll be hitting another milestone soon. So thanks for being part of it.
Thank you.